last month was the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial. You might have heard about that, and it was in the news a little bit. And the Scopes trial obviously was a case of censorship where, frankly, and it wasn't good, but these sort of fundamentalist Christians in Tennessee, they made it a crime to teach evolution. Now, that's obviously the worst way to deal with this subject. But what we see I've done a bunch of interviews. I did an NPR interview and a bunch of stuff on this over the last month or so, that we now have what Justice Scalia called scopes in reverse, where it's the evolutionists who hold all the power dynamics, and they are censoring views that they don't agree with. A very small school district in central rural Pennsylvania had a very short disclaimer that they required to be read before biology class. It said something about, intelligent design is an alternative to Darwin's theory. And if you want to learn more, you can go read this book in the library. Okay, that's all they did. Well, the ACLU and the sort of Darwin lobby, they flipped out over this, and they immediately filed a lawsuit trying to get intelligent design banned, literally trying to ban this idea from public school science classrooms in Dover, Pennsylvania. And sadly, they were successful. The judge did agree with the ACLU and their plaintiffs in that case that intelligent design was a form of religion, and it was not constitutional to teach in public schools. I have a whole 2.5 hour lecture on this titled "It's Not Over After Dover." You can find it on YouTube. But basically, to make a long story short, the judge in that case very, very badly misrepresented the definition of intelligent design. And he got black and white things wrong in his ruling. Like, for example, he said in about 4 or 5 places, just to make sure nobody missed it, that intelligent design has no research or peer-reviewed publications. Now, that claim was false back in 2005. In fact, our amicus briefs presented to the court somewhere between, 8 and 10 peer-reviewed pro-ID scientific papers, and we talked about ID research that had been done, okay? But the judge just basically ignored it. Now, that was in 2005. Today, we have over 300 peer-reviewed pro-ID papers. So the idea that ID isn't, if it wasn't true then, the idea that ID isn't science certainly isn't true now. But in my view, the judge, that ruling is basically a complete misrepresentation of how we define intelligent design, what ID is, blah, blah, blah. But the question is, did the judge in that case accurately refute ideas like irreducible complexity by Michael Behe? Well, there were 3 main issues that came up in that case for irreducible complexity. Number 1, there was the irreducible complexity of a molecular machine called the bacterial flagellum. This is like an outboard motor that kind of spins around on the back of bacteria. And there have been genetic knockout experiments done where basically you can take this molecular machine and one by one, you can knock the genes out so the protein parts don't function anymore. And you can easily see if the flagellum still forms and functions, because in bacteria, if the flagellum is forming, you put them on a little bacterial plate, then the bacteria will swim all around that plate to find food, and they spread out around the plate. If you've successfully killed the bacterial flagellum so it doesn't work properly, then they won't swim around. And all you get is a little dot on the bacterial plate. They're just growing in one little place. And you immediately know that the flagellum is not forming properly. And these genetic knockout experiments have been done. Literally, I can cite, mainstream scientific papers going back to the 80s, where they did genetic knockout experiments on the flagellum. And they found that, yes, it does need about, the numbers I've heard are around 30 or so protein parts in order to function, 20 to 30, depending on exactly who you ask. That means it is by definition irreducibly complex, okay? Now, in the Dover case, you had an ID critic, a Brown University biologist named Ken Miller. He's a very good scientist. I'm not knocking his credibility in any way, but he had a long history prior to the Dover case of basically misrepresenting how we test irreducible complexity. And what he said is, look, if you can take one part of the flagellum and find that it could do something else in the cell, then it's no longer irreducibly complex. This is not how we test for irreducible complexity, okay? This is like saying, I have my laptop, right? If I can take the power cord of my laptop and use it to power my toaster, then somehow you could evolve my laptop into my toaster or my toaster into my laptop in a slow step-by-step manner. Obviously, that's not going to work because there are huge leaps of complexity to go from a toaster to the laptop. And the fact that one part, your power cord, might be able to, be used in both systems does not refute the fact that many parts are going to be needed to be present all at once in order to get your laptop to work. Okay, so it is irreducibly complex. The same is true of the flagellum in bacteria. The fact that, maybe a couple of components or some components can be used to do something else, that does not explain how this complex molecular machine that needs about 30 protein parts, this outboard motor, how do those parts come together to suddenly form a functioning rotary engine, basically an outboard motor on the back of bacteria? Finding that a couple of parts might be able to do something else does not refute irreducible complexity. So we've been saying for years that Ken Miller basically put up what we would call a straw man test of irreducible complexity. He did that during the Dover trial, and unfortunately the judge agreed with him. Now, I think the judge got so many things wrong in the ruling. In fact, if you look at the judge's most celebrated section on whether ID is science, it turns out that over 90% of it was copied either verbatim or near verbatim from an ACLU brief. And it actually led the judge to get things, again, this is where the judge falsely and wrongly claimed that ID had no peer-reviewed papers. He put that into the ruling because he copied that from the ACLU brief and got it wrong. In fact, it's not considered plagiarism or unethical for judges to copy from briefs of the party, but it is frowned upon by higher courts because what judges are supposed to do is they're kind of supposed to split the baby, look at one party and look at the other party and find something a little bit in the middle. When you just copy the brief of one party, courts have said that you tend to incorporate the overzealous advocacy of the attorneys into your ruling, which then, makes there be errors and you get things wrong. And that is exactly what happened in the Dover ruling. We have picked the Dover ruling apart, in 1,000 different ways and shown why it's wrong. In another example, Ken Miller claimed that the blood clotting cascade, a series of enzymes, it's incredibly complex, that shows that allows our blood to clot. Michael Behe argued that blood clotting cascade is irreducibly complex, that it requires a certain core set of enzymes to be present in order for blood clotting to be able to work. Well, Ken Miller argued in the Dover trial against Michael Behe. Both Behe and Miller testified, okay? Ken Miller argued that no, it's not irreducibly complex because he said that there are certain parts of the blood clotting cascade that you can find are missing in certain organisms. Well, guess what? The components that Ken Miller claimed are missing are not part of the section of the blood clotting cascade that Michael Behe claimed was irreducibly complex. He literally did not even address the argument of Michael Behe. Okay, so unfortunately, the judge didn't see this. I wrote about all this, by the way, after the Dover trial. If you want, I can, give you links you can post if you want to send people to the locations. Yeah, but basically, these were straw man tests of irreducible complexity. It was not refuted at the Dover trial. So we could go on and on about this, Brandon. I don't want to give you a whole sermon on the Dover trial, but no, irreducible complexity, if you look in the literature even today for Darwinian explanations for how these complex molecular machines, we're talking about step-by-step Darwinian explanations for how these complex molecular machines formed, you will find that they were missing back in 2005 when the Dover trial happened, and they're still missing today. We do not see evolutionary scientists coming up with step-by-step Darwinian explanations for how these incredibly complex miniature molecular machines and cells can arise. And I think irreducible complexity is still a valid argument.
Okay, so here's my question then is, would it be possible to get these two scientists together back on the mat to rehash the conversation, especially in light of the fact that you're now saying there's like, what, 100x peer-reviewed articles that have been written since then from an ID perspective? Like, would that conversation ever happen? Could it happen? Can we make it happen? Because it seems like if you could actually go through point for point and say, that's not what I'm saying, this is what I'm saying. You're presenting a straw man that's different from what I'm actually saying. And you could actually go through point for point. I think we could help people see the way in which maybe even like the judge, it's such a insanely specific topic. Maybe like the judge is just not even qualified, given that he's not a scientist, to even be able to understand what's being said. Maybe these guys need to go back and forth together and get back on the mat.
Well, that's what we said in some of the amicus briefs that we filed. We said, look, judges are very smart people, but courts should not be settling these scientific debates. And we said that really if a court tries to, decide how do we define science, is intelligent design science, what is the bacterial flagellum irreducibly complex? Those are really important questions, but those should be settled by academics and scientists, not by courts of law. And when courts of law do that, we can get into this more. What it tends to do is it tends to inspire people who want to then persecute those who the judge doesn't agree with, in the scientific community. And that, unfortunately, is what happened to intelligence design after the Dover case. If there's any question, people cite the Dover ruling as if it is like this inerrant ruling. Listen to this, Brandon. A leading anti-ID legal scholar named Jay Wexler, I believe he was at Boston University. I don't know if he's still there, but this is what he wrote about the Dover trial. He said, the part of Kitzmiller that finds that ID not to be science is unnecessary, unconvincing, not particularly suited to the judicial role, and perhaps even dangerous, both to science and to freedom of religion. That's coming from a leading anti-ID legal scholar writing in a legal journal titled First Amendment Law Review. Okay. So this is really interesting that you would get that kind of a comment. That tells you there's more going on here than just taking the Judge Jones said it, I believe it, that settles it approach to intelligent design. A lot of ID critics do that. Oh, this court ruling, said ID is not science. Therefore, I can sleep well at night and never think about ID again. No. The ruling did not actually address the actual theory of intelligent design. It got many scientific points wrong. We've explained this in great detail, and even leading anti-ID legal scholars think the judge did not do a very good job of addressing the subject. But to your question, Brandon, would Michael Behe and Ken Miller do a debate? Here's what I would say. Go for it. Try to set it up. A couple years ago, I was on The Unbelievable Show, and I was actually Justin why am I forgetting? Justin Brierly, he wanted to have me on and to do a debate over intelligent design. And we invited some leading anti-ID scientists to debate me. Ken Miller was one of them. Okay. He would not debate me. And I've written extensively about Ken Miller's arguments, talking about, what he said at the Dover trial, why I believe that, he got some things wrong. And again, I'm not critiquing Ken Miller personally. He's a very nice guy. He's a very good scientist. I think he believes what he's saying. I think he gets a lot of things wrong about intelligent design. I would have been very happy to have a friendly civil dialogue with him. They wouldn't do it. Okay. They did find a very nice historian of science named Adam Shapiro who is willing to debate me, but there's no anti-ID scientist who is willing to debate me. I guarantee you, Brandon, that if you contacted Michael Behe, he would be willing to do a debate with Ken Miller. I can't speak for Michael Behe. He's a good friend of mine. We emailed in the last couple of days. I cannot speak for Ken Miller. I don't know, but I do know that when they asked him if he would debate me on Unbelievable a few years ago, he wouldn't do it. Okay. And I'm not sure if Ken Miller has done debates or not. I don't recall. Maybe he has. I don't want to speak.
How about this? Let's not frame it as even a debate.
Yeah.
Because that can be intimidating. I care about the truth. I'm assuming that Ken Miller cares about the truth, and Michael Behe cares about the truth. So let this be an official invitation to Ken Miller on behalf of Michael Behe, on behalf of Casey Luskin. Why would you run away from a conversation if you have the truth? Why not take an opportunity to convince my audience, which now is at about 1 million people? Why not take an opportunity to defend your position? Isn't that what science is all about? Is people getting together and sharing notes and presenting the evidence and then letting people decide. So if you're okay with that, Casey, I would like to just specifically call out Ken Miller to say, let's not have a debate because that has all these parameters and rules and all this nonsense around it that can sometimes be counterproductive because it's combative and it's who won and who lost. Let's have it be a scientific conversation aimed at the truth.
I love it. I much prefer conversations and debates myself. I'm 100% with you, Brandon. And I don't want to prejudge Ken Miller that he's running away. Maybe he'll say yes. I have no idea. I hope he would. It would be a fascinating conversation, and I would love to see it happen. So I love it, Brandon. Let's see if it'll happen. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna put a flag in that, and I'm gonna pursue that as hard as I can because I really think that there's so much cross aisle talk and projection and I really for the future of this channel, I really want to get into the business of bringing scientists together to talk about these ideas and actually legitimately analyzing both perspectives so that everyone listening can understand both sides and that the truth can out. That's really what I want to do. So anyways, maybe this can be the first case study of that. Okay, now here's my second question is how indicative is everything that you just described of the broader so just to give the listener some context here, you are dealing with a lot of cases related to intelligent design, is my understanding. And you, I think, were really involved with even the Expelled documentary. Can you kind of explain that aspect of your work and kind of, everything that you just said? Can you kind of compare that? Like, how normative is that? How broad is this problem? What are you seeing on the legal side of things, and how do you think that that's informing the broader cultural conversation, which then maybe we'll transition to Alan to speak to sort of how all this trickles down to the streets?
Yeah.
No, absolutely, Brandy. You're asking really, really important questions.
If you're just sitting on a large sum of money in the bank, that money is depreciating at whatever the interest rate is that year. I mean, that's just a fact. You're losing purchasing power. That's why more people are looking at real assets like physical gold and silver to protect their savings, to offset against inflation, to be diversified in their portfolio. And this company that I'm going to tell you about today makes that really easy. They're called Noble Gold Investments. You can buy gold or silver, coins or bars, and have them shipped to your home and stored securely. It's a smart way to convert cash into something that actually holds value across time. Noble Gold is fair, transparent, and they don't pressure you like some of these companies. They just offer solid information and real options. When you own real assets, you have real wealth. Obviously, investing in anything, including precious metals, has some risk associated with it. So obviously, talk to your financial advisor before making any investment decisions. But if you are interested, call 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347. That's 877-646-5347, or click the link in the description below. Now back to the video.
So I'm an attorney. When I came to Discovery Institute in 2005, my initial role for my first, 5 or 10 years there was far more far more legal focused than it is today. Today, my role at Discovery Institute is I'm the research director, and I primarily manage our what we call our ID 3.0 research program. We're funding dozens of research projects around the world looking at the scientific evidence for intelligent design. But initially, I was doing a lot of legal work, and starting this in 2005, in the post-Dover years, the Dover ruling came out in December of 2005. We saw in the years following that an intense spike in persecution of pro-ID scientists. And sometimes they would actually cite the Dover ruling as justification. We've seen people denied tenure because of their intelligent design views. People denied jobs. We've seen students kicked out of graduate programs for, encouraging people to learn about the weaknesses in Darwinian evolution. We've literally seen speech codes adopted at universities where professors are told, you may not mention intelligent design in your classroom. I can give you specific examples of that. So yes, I have seen with my own, eyes, cases of discrimination, persecution, intolerance, whatever you want to call it, against pro-ID scientists and scholars, or Darwinian scientists who are just skeptical of Darwinian evolution, not necessarily even pro-ID. We've seen both of those. It is a real problem. And even if, you can say, well, how many cases have actually gone to court? Well, the reality is, a couple cases have gone to court, but many of these cases, we try to settle them out of court. Or in other cases, you never even hear about them because these scientists are suffering quietly. They are afraid to speak out publicly because they would lose their jobs. Okay, so there are far more scientists out there in the scientific community who support intelligent design, who are basically just keeping quiet, keeping their heads down, self-censoring, because they know from seeing these very public cases that they would, face persecution if they did that. But to the Expel documentary, that documentary came out in 2008. Basically, my role is that I was just sort of a young attorney working behind the scenes on a lot of the cases that ultimately went into Expelled. I didn't have much to do with the actual making of that movie. I was just working on the cases that they talked about in that movie. I remember supplying, quotes of emails and documents showing intolerance from some of the persecutors of the ID scientists that were highlighted in that film. I remember giving some of that evidence to the guys who made the Expelled movie, which they then cited. One of those cases was Guillermo Gonzalez. He was a untenured professor of astronomy at Iowa State University. And he came up for tenure in 2005 or 2006, somewhere around there. And he was denied tenure. And Guillermo's mistake was that in 2004, he had published or co-written the book, The Privileged Planet, with Jay Richards. And it basically argues that Earth is in a very special location in our galaxy, in our solar system, and has other special properties that make it very well suited both for life and also for discovering the universe. Where we exist in our solar system in our galaxy is not only a place that is very well suited for life. It's low radiation, and there's lots of heavy metals. It's the kind of basically elements you need for life to exist, but it's also in a very good position for viewing the stars. And they argue in this book that there's sort of this confluence of parameters that are required for both habitability and scientific measurability. And that is a design argument. And so Guillermo wrote this book. This book did not criticize, by the way, Darwinian evolution. It was looking more at the case for cosmic design of the universe. I'm not talking about really design in biology. But unfortunately, when Guillermo came up for tenure a couple years later, he got voted down. Now, this is interesting because in one of the amicus briefs that we helped write for the Dover trial, we told the judge, look, if you rule against intelligent design, this could fan the flames of intolerance against pro-ID scientists like Guillermo Gonzalez, who was already known as an ID proponent and is not tenured yet. And guess what happened? They literally cited the Dover ruling when they persecuted Guillermo at Iowa State University. Now, some folks will claim that, Guillermo didn't have enough grants, and therefore that was why they legitimately denied him tenure. But he had over 65 peer-reviewed scientific papers, and his department said you'd normally only need about 15 peer-reviewed scientific papers to show that you've done the kind of quality science that demonstrates you deserve tenure at Iowa State. And then on top of that, Guillermo, we actually did public documents requests on some of the scientists who voted on Guillermo's tenure. And what we found was they were doing secret tenure deliberations behind the scenes where they were talking about his intelligent design views and how they couldn't keep him around at Iowa State University. In fact, the chair of Guillermo's department even said that his views that ID is science basically disqualifies him from being a science educator. So we caught them red-handed in these secret behind-the-scenes emails saying that his ID views meant that they could not give him tenure in that department, okay?
And even though they denied it public.
Well, it's basically sunshine laws. In the federal government, we call them FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Okay. Iowa State University is a public university. And so in some states, and Iowa was one of them, public university professors, their emails can be subject to public records requests. So we just requested all the documents that were related to his tenure. We had to fight them for it, but we got those documents. They didn't want to give them. This is a long story. Anyway, but this got talked about and expelled. Another case that was talked about. Go ahead.
Can I just drill into that really quick? So just for the sake of just to distill that, to make sure I'm getting it right. Publicly and officially, they're saying he doesn't get tenure for some other standard, but you're saying he actually meets every standard. He has 65 peer-reviewed articles instead of 15. But then you guys discovered emails that actually say the real reason is because of his intelligent design views.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Brandon. We think that he more than deserved tenure. He had a very credible publication record, and it far surpassed what his university and department normally required for peer-reviewed papers showing that you're doing good science. He was low on grants, but that was not a requirement, and he was bringing in grant money, but that was not a stated requirement for tenure. But we can debate this all day long. Yeah. Let's look at the real reasons. Publicly, yes, they claimed that ID had nothing to do with it. We cataloged the flip-flopping. We literally cataloged, scientists who publicly would say, that ID had nothing to do with it. And then behind the scenes, they were in their, private documents saying that, yes, they voted against him because of his ID views, or we couldn't have him here because of ID. So this is very common in discrimination cases. It's called a pretext, okay? The pretext is the public reason that you give for firing, that whoever it was, that person, that minority, that woman, whatever they might be. But then the actual reason is, the reason that you dig and you find out when you do discovery in a lawsuit or you do these public documents requests. So, if somebody who follows the way discrimination cases work, this is like normal. They give a public reason, which is the pretext. Then the actual reason is something far more, nefarious and even illegal potentially. But, Guillermo Gonzalez, why didn't he sue? I think maybe he could have sued, but Guillermo, a lawsuit is expensive, time consuming. Your name gets dragged through the mud, and there is no guarantee of winning. It's really, even if you have a strong case, it can be a crapshoot. So he just decided he did not want, and then what would he have won? He would have won the right to be in a department with a bunch of colleagues who didn't want him there. Okay. So congratulations, So he just decided at the end of the day that even though I think the evidence was very strong that he was discriminated against, it was better just to move on with his life. And he ended up getting another position in another university, and he's done well for himself. So anyway, yeah.
Well, just to highlight this point before you move on to the next one, can you imagine if there was a story with the same plot points that you just described, but with a different type of discrimination? How big of a story that would be?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, Brandon.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
So I've been in the room when Casey is advising like other scientists, and they're having to basically talk to them with that discrimination mindset. And I'm sitting there like, in the world of, if this was racism, this would be on front page news all day. Because as they're advising them, they're having to tell them, hey, don't be so forthcoming with your ID views. So don't talk too much about your worldview, your belief, and everything like that. And also, you have to perform so excellently that they have no other reason that they could pin on you. So imagine if that was the racism side of things, right? If it was just to be like, hey, you have to be so excellent that they're not going to be able to pin anything else on why they fired you. And that's how they're having to talk to some scientists when they advise them. It's wild.
Yeah, and generally speaking, I am very against sort of like the victim card, but if there is a legitimate like the story that you just told, and it sounds like you have the receipts for that, those actual email correspondences, like if you you actually have all that is a legitimate example of someone being a victim to a particular type of discrimination against a viewpoint. It literally reminds me, by the way, this is probably a whole other sideshow, but it literally reminds me of like Galileo, like at the point in time when he came and was like, guys, hear me out. What if the earth is not the center? It's like everyone, like the consensus was like, no, it is. And like, and you're in trouble and shame on you and we're going to silence you. And so, I mean, I don't know if that's drawing too strong of a corollary, but it literally reminds me of like silencing the ability to present alternative evidence to the dominant view.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to play the victim card either, Brandon, but I mean, I've seen too much. Like I've worked on dozens of cases over the years. We've literally seen speech codes enacted at universities. But, like you said, Galileo, 400, 500 years ago, who held the cultural power? It was the church. Okay. The Catholic Church, unfortunately, did have some cases where it was, silencing scientists who were disagreeing with their dogma. Fast forward to today, and today who holds the cultural power? It's the evolutionary folks in the scientific community. Okay. They hold the cultural power. And so these power dynamics, they're the same. They've just shifted like 180 degrees. And some people will say, are you saying that there's some vast conspiracy against intelligent design? No, not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm saying that we're seeing the same kinds of power dynamics that we see in many other cases of discrimination against, women or minorities, et cetera, where we basically see institutionalized discrimination. Okay. There are certain people that are often, if you talk to the average scientist, what do you think creationists? They think that anybody who's a Darwin skeptic is a fundamentalist creationist, and they have these very negative views of creationists. I mean, we can get into this, but last month was the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial. And there's this film called Inherit the Wind that retold the story of the Scopes trial. Everybody has seen, if you're an American, everybody saw this film in high school or college English class. Okay. What does that film do? It promotes negative stereotypes about Darwin skeptics, painting them as ignorant, bigoted, backwards, fundamentalist kooks. Okay. Never mind that the actual biology textbook that John Scopes used when he was would have taught evolution actually promoted racism and taught that blacks are inferior and that we should basically not be kind to the poor. Okay. Ignore that for a minute. That was all whitewashed from Inherit the Wind. They painted the fundamentalist Christians as the bigots and the racists and the intolerant, backwards, ignorant, freak shows. Okay. That film has been showed in every high school and college classroom. Okay. So if there are negative perceptions of Darwin skeptics out there in the scientific community, and you want to look for sort of what is the super spreader of those negative perceptions, look no further than Inherit the Wind, a film that everybody saw when they were taking high school English, and that paints people who criticize Darwinian evolution in very, very negative light, as if they are dangerous to freedom of thought and intolerant, et cetera, et cetera. You got to get rid of these people. They're dangerous to society. If that's really who we were, I might agree with you. Okay. But that's not who we are. Unfortunately, though, those negative perceptions has been spread. And so you have these negative views of Darwin skeptics that often are very well crystallized in scientific institutions. And so it's just kind of part of the atmosphere, part of the culture. And so this leads to what we call institutionalized discrimination, where you get the good old boys who all share certain negative views of certain minority or disfavored groups. In this case, the minority viewpoint is, scientists who support intelligent design or disagree with evolution, and they then get discriminated against or marginalized in various ways. Okay, this is not hard to understand. It's the same sort of dynamics, power dynamics of discrimination and marginalization we see in every other issue. It's not some grand conspiracy. It's normal discrimination practices that we see everywhere else. And unfortunately, it's very, very real on this issue.
Well, and I love, it was one of your videos I was watching where you described the classic evolutionary model where it's sort of the two-dimensional shot of the monkey slowly turning into modern man. And you described that as an icon of Darwinism. Mm-hmm. And that really got me thinking about how there is a type of dogma. I'm not calling it a religious dogma in a literal sense, but it is dogmatic in a similar way to how religious dogma can be bad when it is bad. And it got me thinking about how in the modern West, the scientist, the man of medicine is like the priest class. That is the authority position in the modern West. And I'm not even necessarily saying that that's wrong, but I think that framing is helpful in terms of understanding human nature and how do we treat that type of authority? How do we treat who has the sort of like the reins on information? And so that really got me thinking along those lines. But I will say this: I think that there is still, and maybe this is a good transitional point here. So we're kind of painting a picture of the power system, the authority, the dominant view, consensus, all of this. But I still think then we need to go and actually make a case for the intelligent design position. And if someone is a Darwin skeptic, are their reasons for being skeptical valid? We actually need to go through that. Because if I were to come along and say, grass is red, it's like, well, there's a reason, bro, that you're on the sideline here. And so I think that now we should maybe, although actually before we do this, Alan, can you just speak to some of your street experiences? I know you've gone around to different campuses and different cities across America and talked with people. And so again, I guess like chapter one here of our conversation is establishing maybe like some of the context as to why your average person on the street thinks the way that they do about the Darwinian topic. But maybe you can build that out a little bit and sort of give us a portrait of what that actually looks like.
Yeah, I think some of it is some of what I saw and have seen is the lack of critical thinking and need to even think about this, right? We live in a very we regurgitate information that we see on social media or that we hear in the classroom, and we don't critically think through that because we've been taught to just take in and then spit out what the right answers are. So I think, in academia, and I've seen it not only with people that are learning in the public spaces, but also in the church. So a lot of the street interviews that we've done where we're asking, where did all of this come from? Who designed us or what designed us? People will say one of three things, right? So they'll say, I don't know, or like, I don't know at all and I don't care. The reason I believe what I believe is because I was taught this. Or then you have the people that say, I believe what I believe because I learned it, And so that's what we've seen is the reason that a lot of people, I think, aren't critically thinking is just because it's easy to not worry about that, And so if we want to suppress truth, which is what, Casey talked about with Romans 1, what's the best way to suppress truth? Just think less about desiring to live out your truth, like live out what true truth is, or have to discover what truth is. Because on the other side of discovering truth is accountability, is responsibility. And so, in the street interviews, what I'm seeing a lot is that people view intelligent design, like when we go to college campuses and talk to, let's say, an evolutionary biologist major, they'll say, that's for philosophy class, that's not for science class. And so there's this separation where they're almost conflating intelligent design with creationism, where they're two different things. They fall under a similar umbrella, but intelligent design is just desiring to. It's not tied to a religious worldview. You're just saying that everything looks designed by an intelligence, and so it's critical against evolutionary Darwinism. But yeah, so that's what we've seen is people are just conflating it with religiosity. So a lot of times when we actually have the conversation with somebody and we say, hey, as I've been talking to you about intelligent design, I haven't mentioned Jesus at all, and you just keep talking about how Christians get it wrong. Why do you keep doing that? And they'll just respond with like, oh, I don't know. And then I'll just say, all we've talked about is science so far. So is this not something that's fair to maybe discuss in a science class? And then most of the time it's just been like, I guess that's a fair point and I agree with you. So I think most people, it's funny, the loudest people on social media are obviously the people that are angry. But what I've seen from both street interviews to then talking to the experts is that behind closed doors, most people are reasonable and most people are willing to have these conversations. It's just nobody wants to get flamed on social media by all the critics,
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. So, Dr. Luskin, we're going to transition now into the science. But before we do, let's take that halftime break you were talking about because I got to use the restroom too.
Okay.
Is now a good time for you?
I'm good. I'm feeling fine. Yeah.
Then give me 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
You're good. Good job, Alan. Good job.
I'm just trying to give a little 2-minute thing that probably isn't helpful at all.
It's cool. No, it's good, man. I want it. We need to get you out there. We need to get Science Dilemma out there, man.
Yeah.
This is fun. He's a very good interviewer.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. He's so good at understanding how to take the conversation where it needs to go. Yeah.
He feels a little bit like Joe Rogan for Christian apologetics in some ways. Like,
yeah. Asks what the people are most likely thinking to ask or what they need to be asking. Yeah. No, very natural. I love it. I love the setup too. I was the Guillermo Gonzalez situation because he missed tenure twice, right? Or got declined twice, or was it just once?
There was an appeal which got denied, but that was really once. Hey, Brandon. Oops.
Yeah, he probably can't hear you yet.
Yeah.
I like the call out for the debate.
Yeah, that was awesome.
The conversation.
Hey, Brandon, before we shift to the science, I want to give one quote from Lynn Margulis, she was married to Carl Sagan at one point. She was a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and definitely not a Christian or an ID proponent, but she was a critic of Darwinian evolution. And she talked about how even she faced persecution. I don't know if there's a way to work that quote in before we do the transition.
Do it right now. Because I can picture the edit in my mind and it's all going to flow perfectly. Go for it.
Okay. So, Brandon, I just want to point out, absolutely, I want to get into the science. In fact, the vast majority of the interviews I do are mostly on the science. It's not typical that I spend this much time talking about, the sort of academic freedom side of things, although it is very important. But for folks who are skeptical that this is really happening, and I agree with you, by the way, we need to establish that ID is good science. If it's not, it doesn't deserve academic freedom, and maybe it should be persecuted. I think ID absolutely is good science. We'll get into that. But for those folks who are maybe skeptical that this is really happening, I want to give a quote from Lynn Margulis and Dorian Sagan. Lynn Margulis was a very eminent biologist. She was a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and she actually was married to Carl Sagan at one point, okay? Definitely not a Christian or probably even a conservative person, very much, a standard, evolutionary scientist. But she was actually quite a critic of the Darwinian model of evolution. She thought that mutations did not build new species, all right? But listen to what she said about the pushback that she received as an eminent evolutionary scientist. She said, honest critics of the evolutionary way of thinking who have emphasized problems with biologist dogma and their undefinable terms are often dismissed as if they were Christian fundamentalist zealots or racial bigots, okay? So what do we have in this little quote? We see that she's acknowledging that there's kind of a dogmatic way of thinking among evolutionary biologists, where if you disagree with them, they start to treat you the way, people think that the Catholic Church used to treat Galileo or whatever. And they get dismissed as if they're crazy zealots or racial bigots. That is the inherit the wind, mode of thinking, where These people are dangerous for society. We've got to get rid of them. She experienced this as a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and very much not a Christian. She was an evolutionary scientist. She just saw a different way that evolution worked than the standard neo-Darwinian model. So this is very interesting that we have somebody like Lynn Margulis, former wife of Carl Sagan. She passed away about, 12 or 13, 14 years ago or something.